You are loved with an everlasting love. That's what the Bible says. And underneath are the everlasting arms. We knew, we 5 missionary wives in Ecuador in January of 1956, that we were not wives anymore. We were widows. Our husbands had been slain by a tribe of Indians called Aucas as they attempted to go to take to them the gospel of Jesus Christ. Life magazine got word of the missing men before we knew that they were all dead. Immediately they asked Cornell Kappa, a photographer-correspondent, if he would go to Ecuador to cover this story. He flew immediately and got there in time to be taken to the beach where the 5 men had died. A naval mission plane was circling overhead as Cornell landed in a helicopter. This is what he wrote. The atmosphere on the beach was fantastic. Everybody's hand was on the trigger, looking toward the jungle. I did not have to ask why. The rain was coming down in buckets. My handkerchief served no more to clean my water-soaked lenses. Suddenly I saw a struggling group of men carrying the last of the missionaries to his common grave. He was on an improvised stretcher made out of the aluminum sheets that had covered the treehouse where the men had lived. It was a terrible sight. The light was eerie. The pallbearers struggled against a muddy bank that led to the grave. I just made it in time to see the lifeless legs disappearing into the hole. Grim, weary missionaries looked for the last time at their friends, whom they could no more identify. One said, "It's better this way. I feel less miserable." They lingered for a moment, offering up a few words of prayer. At the end, Major Nurnberg, facing the jungle with carbine in hand, turned back toward the small knot of men about the grave and called, "Let's get out of here." The rain let up a bit, the helicopter was ready to leave, and the time was near for decision. I could either go back with the pilot or stay with the ground party, starting the overnight homeward trek. It was an easy decision. To leave now would be cheating. I gave my exposed film to the pilot. The struggle of the living to stay alive had just begun. At last we were off. The canoes were overloaded, and at the slightest movement, water poured through the side. This was to be no fun at all, I thought quietly to myself. Major Nurnberg was in front with his carbine, and I could see from the back of his head that he had a mean look in his eyes. Nurnberg leaned back on D. Short, a red-headed, very long-legged missionary in a very small boat, who in turn leaned on me, and I leaned on the dismounted wheel of the ill-fated plane which we had salvaged. My back ached. Like a mother hen, I tried to protect my film pouches and to hide my cameras from the rain. It was futile. Back in the kitchen in Shelmetta, Dr. Art Johnson was describing to us the details of what had happened. We wanted to know them all. They wanted to protect us from the worst. We wanted to know the worst so that we could face it and accept it and move on. There were many questions that the ground party could not answer. There had been evidence of struggle on the beach. We had hoped, of course, that if the men were dead, that their death had been quick and easy. When the ground party came back, they told us that there were deep footprints from one end of the beach to the other. Some of the footprints were those of shoes, some barefoot. What kind of a struggle could have gone on for such a long time? There was a bullet hole in the window of the airplane. What did that mean? Had there been shooting? Had any Aucas been killed? There was no blood. Had the men backed into the river, or had they been thrown in? Why were all the bodies in the river? Frank Drown, the leader of the ground party, had this explanation to give. An Indian, when he first hears or sees something new, will accept it. Perhaps he accepts merely from normal curiosity, but he does accept. But after he has had time to think about the novelty, he begins to feel threatened, and that's the time when he may attack. A group of Indians will sit back and discuss a new contrivance or a new way of doing things with some eagerness, but the witch doctors, who are the real conservatives, can be counted on for rejection. They have a lot of authority, and when they work on their fellow tribesmen to reject an innovation, the people seldom go contrary to their advice. As in any culture, the younger men may be looking for a new way of life, but the older ones hang on to their traditions and maintain the status quo. Furthermore, most Indians are basically and understandably skeptical of anything the white man offers. And don't forget that, after all, this was the first time within memory that the Aucas have had an encounter with the white man which was completely friendly. We can only hope that they are pondering that fact right now. My imagination went wild, trying to picture the scene on the beach on that afternoon of January the 8th, 1956. Which of the men watched the others fall? Which of them had time to think of his wife and children? Had one been covering the others in the treehouse with a gun and come down in an attempt to save them? Had they suffered long? These questions remained a mystery. We knew this much: whosoever shall lose his life for my sake and the gospel's, the same shall save it. There was no question as to the present state of our loved ones. They were with Christ. Once more, ancient words from the Book of Books came to mind. All this has come upon us, yet have we not forgotten thee. Our heart is not turned back, neither have our steps declined from thy way, though thou hast sore broken us in the place of dragons, and covered us with the shadow of death. We mothers tried to help the children to know that this was not a tragedy. My daughter was only 10 months old. There was nothing that she could understand, no father that she was going to miss. I know my daddy is with Jesus, but I miss him, said 3-year-old Stevie McCulley. I wish he would just come down and play with me once in a while. Several weeks later, back in the States, Stevie's little brother, Matthew, was born. One day the baby was crying, and Stevie was heard to say, "Never mind, when we get to heaven, I'll show you which one is our daddy." Was the price too great? Think of the impact that the death of those 5 men, which was reported in newspapers and on television around the world, has had on thousands of people who otherwise would never have heard of them. In Brazil, a group of Indians at a mission station deep in the Mato Grosso, when they heard the news, dropped to their knees and cried out to God for forgiveness for their own lack of concern for fellow Indians who did not know of Christ. In Rome, an American official wrote to one of the widows, "I knew your husband. He was to me the ideal of what a Christian should be." An Air Force major stationed in England, with many hours of jet flying, immediately began making plans to join the Missionary Aviation Fellowship. A missionary in Africa wrote, "Our work will never be the same." We knew 2 of the men. Off the coast of Italy, an American naval officer was involved in an accident at sea. As he floated alone on a raft, he recalled Jim Elliot's words, which he had read in a news report. "When it comes time to die, make sure that all you have to do is die." He prayed that he might be saved, knowing that he had more to do than die. He was not ready. God answered his prayer, and he was rescued. In Des Moines, Iowa, an 18-year-old boy prayed for a week in his room, then announced to his parents, "I'm turning my life over completely to the Lord. I want to try to take the place of one of those 5. Letters poured in to us 5 widows. From a college in Japan, "We are praying for you." From a group of Eskimo children in a Sunday school in Alaska. From a Chinese church in Houston, Texas. From a missionary on the Nile River who had picked up Time magazine and seen a photograph of her friend, Ed McCulley. Who can say that they would have done more if they had lived than they could do in dying? Remember Jim Elliot's words, "He is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose." He had written in his diary these words, "I walked out to the hill just now. It is exalting, delicious, to stand embraced by the shadows of a friendly tree with the wind tugging at your coat tail and the heavens hailing your heart, to gaze and glory and give oneself again to God. What more could a man ask? Oh, the fullness, pleasure, sheer excitement of knowing God on earth. I care not if I never raise my voice again for him, if only I may love him and please him. Perhaps in mercy he will give me a host of children that I may lead them through that vast star field to explore his delicacies, whose finger ends set them to burning. But if not, if only I may see him, touch his garments, and smile into his eyes, then not stars nor children shall matter, only himself. O Jesus, Master and Center and End of all, how long before that glory is thine which has so long waited thee? Now there is no thought of thee among men, then there shall be thought for nothing else. Now other men are praised, then none shall care for any other's merits but thine. Hasten, glory of heaven, take thy crown, subdue thy kingdom, enthrall thy creatures.
Gateway to Joy 96. Life goes on.